Matthew Smith, Dave's Head, hanging out. This is amazing. So Dave has been hanging out with this. We're having a wonderful time. It's beautiful out here on the ranch now. The weather's nice.
Yeah.
Summer's over. Dave brought the cool weather with him, and we're absolutely grateful for that. Matthew, you are hanging out with this. We're going to talk some amazing shit tonight. We actually have some incredibly cool stuff. You have been doing some amazing research. I heard also that you met up with a dear friend of ours, Kelly Harding, out there in Washington. You guys went on some beach he showed you. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about that and about yourself while we're at it?
My name is Matthew Smith. I run a YouTube channel that is currently semi on pause as I deal with some health issues, which we can or cannot talk about later as we wish. And I design, I'm an architect. I design primarily roundhouses, which is a whole lot of fun. My website is dreamdesignbuild.org. Wooden yurts, basically tricked out wooden yurts in really cool locations all over the country. And that's what I do for my bread and butter. And then on the side, I research old world architecture and ether energy and just all the fun stuff. And I get to rap with guys like yourselves, and it brings me a lot of joy. So
Thank you. This is awesome. This is great to be here.
Yeah, same. So what did you and Kelly find out there, and where were you guys at on this beach that she took you to?
well, we never made it to the beach together. That's kind of on pause currently as well, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I went down to her house, and so Kelly is like third, fourth generation Seattleite. She's she knows this town. She's Seattle, and she's just super cool, man. And she invited me. She's been following my work on Marvelous Old World, and then you put us in touch, and we finally got together. And so what she has dug up on the beach, specifically, I think it's at Carkeek Park, which is on the Puget Sound. It's north of downtown by a couple of miles, and it is on the western shore of Seattle, facing Puget Sound. And she dug up, and there's a railroad going by there too. So between the beach and up by the tracks, she's dug up a bunch of melted bricks, like full-on melted bricks. And they just look like just putty, dripping, like frozen in time. And what she hypothesizes is that they came from the 1889 Great Fire in Seattle that wiped out downtown Seattle. And makes sense to me because that's been a real focus of my research this past year. And it just brings up a lot of really strange and interesting questions. So that's the heart of it. And I guess the strangest and most interesting question of all is, how do you get heat hot enough to melt bricks? When it requires 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit to melt brick. That's extreme heat. That's hotter than your urban conflagration.
Well, jet fuel can bring down a couple of steel sticks, so why wouldn't that work, right? It's interesting when you talk about this melted brick idea, because then we're talking about ancient technology, basically, right? Because what now creates a fire that would be hot enough to burn at those temperatures to melt this type of brick? And then the question would be, are you able to maybe locate and recover some of that brick and perhaps be able to tell like how it was destroyed? Would there be a residue perhaps? Like the glass, the vitrified glass, for instance, over in the, I think, Gobi Desert, right? Sahara Desert. There's this site over there, and this is also allegedly the site where they talked about these Vimanas having these great weapons and this nuclear war occurring. And vitrified glass is one of these things where sand gets hot enough to turn into glass like that. But it does take these crazy temperatures that mankind allegedly didn't possess the technology of at that time, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Vajras, like the devices with the trident, kind of three-dimensional trident on both sides with like that knob in the middle that looks like a 0 point sort of Z-pinch type diagram. Vajra means both lightning and diamond, which is interesting because if you think about the power that it takes to actually vitrify sand, let's say, like to turn sand into glass, right? Lightning can do that, but a thunderbolt of the god, like it's talked about exactly in all the ancient scriptures talk about the thunderbolts of the gods, and then the images of Zeus holding a trident, or it's I think that's referring all to the same thing. And it's and this gets into the work of Immanuel Velikovsky, where he talks about planets in collision or something, where that the Newtonian idea of a stable clockwork solar system is actually not really true, that
Right.
it's an unstable system. And then if planets, which are charged bodies, if they get wander too close to each other, they will actually discharge and create an electrical arc in the form of thunderbolts. So Thunderbolts Project is a wonderful organization on YouTube that has just oodles of videos getting into the plasma physics of all of this, the electric universe theory. Dave, I know that you're deep into this stuff, and I want
It's
to pick your
well,
brain a
you
little bit.
described you described what happens when you put two capacitors close to each other, right? You have an automatic
Correct.
spark discharge between the two. So,
That's it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That
that's one idea of how this sort of phenomena could have come about. And then you get into instant petrification and petrified wood and all the biblical accounts of carving valleys and canyons and mountains raising and terraforming landscapes through plasma discharges in this sort of
right.
phenomena.
What's interesting is that the what was that called? That thing we were just
Vajra.
the Vajra. It's interesting to note that it's something that I know that Elon Musk has tweeted out that he claims to sleep next to. But more importantly than
Hmm.
that, it speaks to what you said about the Z pinch, and then about the infinity symbol and this repetition of that. But also, it's interesting when you guys had talked about just discussed earlier a few minutes ago what could have melted these types of bricks. Well, if if they were using what you'd call like longitudinal scalar waves, then you could technically have uh the post burn look as if it was burned, but when the actual process happened, it would actually be more like a very cold fusion type situation where the internal mass is then being pulled out of the object itself in a very cold way. This is basically using heat to produce cold to then extract mass out of an object and make it basically, whether it's a submarine or a brick, basically just deflate like jello. Now, there's been
Hmm.
some theory that this is what was also used to bring down the twin towers, as you referenced just a few minutes ago. But that's one way that it could work. And the ironic thing is, this goes back to our chat the other day about normal calorimeters would not detect this because
Yeah.
by definition there's no set parameter or spectrum by means to which measure this effect from.
This is
And
what's fascinating. We talked
yeah,
about,
yeah,
excuse me, we talked about some events occurring in such a way to where the tools are calibrated so that they'll pick up and detect and find this, but it's got nothing to do with that. They were calibrated to find that, but also they're calibrated not to find this other energy source, which is why it's sort of not only kept from you, but the machines won't even pick it up, so
yeah,
it's not even detectable. So this is what's fascinating about this idea: is that
right,
maybe it was something that can resemble something else like melted bricks, but really it was something completely, I
right.
I guess, sort of natural,
Sort of, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's one of these things to where now it's what's the question of technology versus magic versus science versus just knowledge? Like, was just a
Hmm.
combination of things that they knew how to put together? Because then that's, in my mind, a little bit more in the realm of knowledge, but we'd call it technology.
right, right.
Technology.
Yeah,
Does
that's it.
that
Yeah, I
work?
like that one. Yeah,
Yeah.
Technology.
And there's that AC Clark quote, I think, any technology sufficiently advanced will appear as magic,
right,
Yeah.
that
right.
sort of thing.
And that seems to be what we're mostly talking about with this kind of stuff when you really look at it, because it's gaslit and away from you that it even exists at all. The
Yes,
Hmm.
detectors can't detect anything. You're told it's crazy and you can't look at things that way because it goes against the science, right? But then really you're gaslit about against your own observation to kind of dick with your discernment.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. That's what happens, and you then that creates a debate amongst people in society, and next thing you know, you've detracted from the thing that you were even focusing on to begin with, and therefore you end up like what we have now, where we don't know what caused the. Sorry, we don't know if there's anything of that type that occurred during the 1889 Great Fire, and so
Hmm.
it just kind of it's something that just gets kind of lost to history, right?
You know,
So it just
his story. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
right.
And Matt, you were showing on a presentation we had on the website that you did with us. It was this awesome question and answer. And thank you so much for that. That was incredible. You had images. I think they were woodcuts or just drawings, but they're newspaper clippings, some of them, of airships laser beaming
Hmm.
down in the 1800s. Like, what were they laser
Yeah,
beaming? They weren't spotlights because they were laser beaming, and then fire was coming out only exactly where they were shooting in some of the images to depict it. That's the origin point of it.
I think those images were from the First World War, I believe. But yeah, it begs the question, like, what the hell? What are they
right,
showing there? And there's a lot of those portrayals of airship, zeppelins, whatever, where it's not bombs being dropped. It's some kind of, it looks like an energy weapon coming out of the belly of these ships and blowing up the cities below. And how terrifying is that? But it begs the question of how far back does this technology go? And
right,
so, when you get into the urban fires of the late 1800s, like in Washington, I've pointed out that Seattle, Ellensburg, which used to be a prominent city in central Washington state, now it's a state, and Spokane, which is on the eastern side of the state, all of those, just the downtown, all of them burned down within 1 month of each other in the summer of 1889, at the same exact time that Washington Territory was holding a statehood convention where the United States Federal Federation
right.
wanted to drag the territory into the Union. And so all of a sudden there's this like shock and awe campaign going on where these downtowns are bring down. And it's not like the storybooks tell us, old Mr. Leary's lantern knocking over, the lantern in the shed, and it's a wooden, ramshackle outpost town with made out of matchsticks ready to go up. No, we've
Right.
so many people in this research field have looked at these photos, and these were old stone, brick, masonry, ornate, old world urban centers.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Like they were,
yeah. So
and I know.
that's just, sorry to tie it in a bow. Like when Kelly's finding these bricks melted on the beach, that could have been from that time. It just, yeah, like I've been saying, stones don't lie. We can
Right.
suppose what we want, but when you've got the actual object in front of you and say, well, how did this happen? How
But
did this melt?
Yeah.
And this is the
Right.
question, though. This brings up what Dave and I were talking
Yeah.
about can you fake what something looks like by doing something else? Meaning an energy source or a technology that you're told is crazy and that doesn't exist, right? Like the ability to melt bricks or to be able to turn them into complete liquid and melt them into place, like we see in some of these ancient structures before they were stacked on with the haphazard little rocks that they just found everywhere from the previous or the later societies, right? So there's this
Mhm.
advanced way of looking at the world beforehand, and it seems that it was just ubiquitous. It was everywhere because you find this neoclassical architecture, this old world architecture, even in Australia, New
Yeah.
Zealand, all over the world. It's the same
Right.
damn kind of architecture around the same time. And then all these pictures where you're supposed to believe that this huge monolith was created in whatever time that they said it was dirt streets, and nobody in any of the pictures. So this town doesn't even look habitated, yeah. And then but whenever you go to these buildings, and Matt, this is something you and I've spoken about before, when it says founded, that doesn't mean
Mhm.
that they built the motherfucker. That means that they found it and just slapped their name on it. And there's fascinating cases of these whole
Yeah.
centuries being wiped off of plaques that are crazy, just wild numbers. So this is what fascinates me so much, and I love the work that you're doing. And shout out Mac Terillian as well for the
Oh
Great
Mhm.
yeah.
Deception podcast.
Yeah.
Brother, he's the one that connected us all. But amazing kind of work that y'all do here, and it's just fascinating to me, dude. And especially now we're talking about airships because we did the Dell Show episode. And that just lights me up, man. I love shit like that.
It makes you think, because when you look at World War II and you look at World War One, and you don't really know why World War One was started, and that, and then you look at the Hindenburg crashing. So it's interesting, and then you look at some of this footage that I've put up quite a while ago, but on my Instagram, showing the Germans doing commercials. This was before World War II was started, but you're talking about, for example, if I'm not mistaken, things like maglev trains. You had
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, and you had engineers out of like Michigan in the 1930s and 40s, just again before World War II, talking about how they could power entire towns off of just, like $5 a month or whatever. So even converted to today's, like, I think still nothing significant. And so it's interesting to see that when all of this happened, it was almost as if there was no problem with these things existing within Europe to a particular degree. But the second it got into the market, or the public consciousness, more specifically of North America, it seemed as though, and I'm speaking particularly to the Hindenburg, it seemed as though that there was something. It looked like something needed to be done. So you had the burning of the Hindenburg, and then it's just very interesting, because the burning of the Hindenburg, at least in terms of what I can understand with respects to the historical cross reference, seems to align as well with I think it was President or Chancellor Hindenburg or something like that, that was first in command, and then Hitler was right below him before Hitler took power. So it was almost that, they built this great
Mm.
ship, and then you name it after the leader, whatever, and then all of a sudden, what do you know? It burns down, and when
Huh.
it gets to America. So
Well,
yeah,
also sort of a I heard as well, to add to
right.
this, sort of psyop against helium and that type of air travel. So they
Oh,
wanted to
sure.
ban helium as a
Helium.
substance because of how dangerous it was, and they said that that's why it went up like that. And so it was this huge smear campaign against helium, and now, of course, the number one consumer of helium, anybody on
NASA.
the planet?
It's NASA.
That's right. They're
Yeah,
inflating all of those
they're the
things to
biggest
send them up there.
harvester of helium.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they got to. It's a
Yep.
lot. A lot of balloons to fake what they're doing. So it's interesting though when now we look at it from that angle, because it puts a whole new spin on this. But still, then you tie in the foundlings, these hundreds of thousands of children that were just shown the fuck up and trained from one side of the country to another with no parents. They were just
Right.
orphans. Just here, take these kids. Who needs a baby? Here, take three. The incubator stuff set up in the World's Fairs, that was just
Right.
weird. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
just people were into different shit back then, but it just seems odd.
David, you said something about, you just raised the question, like, why did World War One happen? It's like these things just happen, but like when
Right.
you piece it all together, when you string all these events together, I mean, go back to the Civil War, and then you have the urban conflagrations all across the United States and beyond, all throughout the late 1800s. Then you have World War One, you have World War Two,
Right.
and it seems, if you put it all together, it really does seem like just this a long-term plan to systematically deconstruct this old world technology, culture, architecture,
Right.
antiquitech, like all of these old systems that ran on, let's just say, ether energy, system that has rolled over the old world in this last 150 years or so, give or take, is based on debt.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
all based on debt. So everything they do when when the central bank generates more money, somehow just comes out of the ether to
Right.
for another war, and another, to open another war front, is like endless money, because they just produce the money, which is basically creating debt, pulling, like Gregory Mannarino is great to listen to if you're trying to figure out the economic side of it. They're pulling the wealth out of the future
Right.
in the form of debt. And that's the system. And it's a vampire system. And so, I look at the old architecture, we all grew up in this system, right? And our
Right.
minds, our consciousness are shaped by the age that we grew up in. But I look at these old world buildings, and they're so ornate, and like no expense is spared to make it as beautiful as it possibly can.
Yeah.
And the only thing that makes sense is that those buildings were built under a different system that wasn't debt based.
Yeah.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that the more, if you think about these buildings, that they actually were doing something functional when they put these spires and domes and antiquitech antenna, that they
Yeah.
actually would using piezoelectric materials and properties and generating electricity to somehow, like radiant fireplaces, to heat the place naturally, or
Right.
through this ether energy. The more spires and domes and antenna that they built, the more
Right.
energy they were drawn down, and that energy
Yes.
was going directly into the inhabitants. Whereas our our built environment is completely the antithesis of that, where it's all extractive, it's all subtractive. It's, you know, you're drawing from resources. You're the occupants, like the vitality of the human beings that occupy those buildings is being drained to keep those buildings going. Like, think about just a modern office building.
It's a
Right.
complete. It's a just a system of constant drainage in every
Battery.
aspect. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And,
Yeah.
It's
They
and
want
this is the thing.
scarcity. They want dependency.
right.
On
Right.
control.
Because, like you said, the system's got to work like a 30-year mortgage. If not, it's not.
Right.
If yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, when are we gonna fucking overthrow this thing? What are we doing here?
It's going to
You know?
collapse of its own. I think
Yeah,
it's
I've
just going
heard
to
that a
collapse of
bunch.
its
You know, they
own.
said that in
I
the
agree.
Bolshevik Revolution as well,
I
and
agree.
they just sat by and didn't do anything. So at what point are we just gonna go?
Yeah.
We're done, like with the waiting. You know, like
Yeah.
what are we
Well,
doing?
you're doing it. I mean, you're doing it, Brandon. You're building your alternative, and I think that's what you need to do. You know.
And I'm not saying break out the guillotines or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying just unsubscribe from the bullshit that they're
Mm-hmm.
feeding you, and the thing will
Unplug.
die. That's
Yeah.
it. That's all you've got to do. This is the
I think to
airships,
your
by the way.
point, I think that's why we're seeing so much of what we're seeing in the world now, because the system is in chaos, because many are unplugging. Now it would be great if more unplugged, but I think that's part of what we're seeing as well.